Everybody, and welcome to the Big Idea Podcast. My name is Eric Bramlett. I am joined, as always, by Tim Sutherland, and we are here to rock the mic, as it were. I'm the DJ, he's the rapper, and this Big Idea series we're going to talk about today is called I Quit.
I quit?
But before you do, listen to the whole Big Idea, because it's not what you might think based on that title. And no, I am not quitting. I just said that was the title.
Okay.
I Quit.
Okay.
I'm not saying that I quit.
No.
I'm saying that it's called I Quit.
Yes.
So it's called I Quit.
Yeah.
And it's 3 weeks.
But Eric, isn't quitting usually a bad thing?
Usually it is. Yes.
So we're telling people to do a bad thing?
That seems contrary to our normal Big Idea approach.
Wow.
And yet, we're not telling them that, are we?
Wow, so where could we be going that was not negative in people's lives?
Well, if it was not negative, then that would mean that it was yes positive, which would mean that we're probably telling them to quit things that they shouldn't be doing.
And that would be good to quit.
Good to quit. Good to quit in this case.
See what he did there?
I just hope that there's a Bible reference for those things, because I can't imagine just telling them that.
Yes.
In the effort to just sort of self-help.
Yes.
All right, well, that's the deal. It's summer. It's one of those series, where it's one story fits all. You can come in and check out anytime you like, but you can never leave kind of thing. And so we're covering one basic large story over the course of the 3 weeks of the series. And so let's dive right in. So what is the first thing that we need to quit?
Well, we are going to be talking about quit living in fear. The larger narrative that we're using for the whole deal is at least parts of the Exodus. God's people being freed from slavery. To a lot of people who've heard this story before, it's like, that's one of those Bible stories. What we're going to help people see, though, is that the Exodus is before the time of Jesus, the central saving story of God's, here's what God's done for his people. And so the Exodus is a huge deal. Their entire history, it is the event and the story that shapes who they are as a people. And so we're going to draw excerpts and chapters from the Exodus and talk about the stuff that we deal with in our lives and the things that we can actually experience things getting better through quitting. And the first one we're talking about is quit living in fear. It's pretty easy to, I think, empathize with the Israelites. They've been set free from captivity. God's done all these incredible things through Moses and Aaron, and they're traveling out into the wilderness, but then they hear a rumbling in the distance, and maybe somebody goes, "Is that thunder?" And they go, "Oh, that's not thunder." And then you see clouds coming, and here comes the Egyptian army after them, and their backs to the Red Sea. And it's just interesting what it says. It says that they were terrified. Mm-hmm. And I'd say terrified is a little bit more than worried. They're terrified, and that they cried out in fear. And they're crying out to Moses. They're crying out to God, and God says, "Stand firm," or through Moses, God says, "Stand firm and see what I'm going to do for you today." And so one of the things we're going to be talking about is, kind of what are the Egyptians that are pursuing you in your life, and how does living in fear of them make the situation actually worse? Because it's one thing to be in a bad situation, whether it's financial or relational or physical health related, but then the fear of it. I don't know what your experience is, but for me, the fear of something is often worse than the thing itself, if it should actually happen. I mean, when I was a little kid, I was deathly afraid of getting a cavity and having a cavity filled. I was just petrified, terrified. And so then I had my first cavity filled, and I was so freaked out. And it wasn't fun to get a cavity filled, but the fear and the trepidation of it was far worse than the thing itself. And everything isn't necessarily like that, but it's this thing that's going, okay, we need to kind of tease apart our circumstances that are troubling us and our reaction to our circumstances. We can't control our circumstances, but God can help us control our reactions. And so we're going to talk about this whole thing of going, okay, you don't know how this is going to turn out. Now, there's the old saying from, I think it's often quoted in 12-step groups that, 90% of the things you worry about never happen anyways. and I think we kind of know that in our heads, but we don't really feel that in our hearts. And so sometimes God's going to intervene and save you from it. Other times God's going to get you through it. But it's like this shifting from just living in fear of what's about to happen to start looking for what God's going to do to either get me out of it or get me through it. And then we'll parallel this, as we will in every week, with something Jesus said. So we'll go from that experience of the Red Sea parting and God saving the day for him to what Jesus said about not worrying and about each day having enough trouble of its own. And we're going to be talking about this whole thing going, okay, maybe today I can't help it if I feel some worry, if I feel some fear, but there's some things that I can do so that I'm not constantly just living immersed in the fear of whatever Egyptians I feel like are pursuing me.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think one question I have is, when you're talking about a story that ends so dramatically positively for the Israelites, not so much for the Egyptians.
Not so
actually.
much.
But, because I think when you're setting up this storyline of, don't be afraid, trust in God, I think a lot of our fears are within circumstances that don't necessarily get better, that don't have the miracle, of the Red Sea parting. How do we weave in and out of, maybe some of those fears? Fears for things that, I just got the diagnosis.
Yeah.
So now what?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
We're going to talk about that you can count on God to do one of two things. He's either going to save you from it, or he's going to save you in spite of it somehow, some way. And that's the tough thing, is when you don't know in advance. And that's what's important for the story of the Israelites. They didn't know this was going to happen.
Right.
I mean, in our view, it's like, oh, we know what happens next. But, their backs are up against the wall. They don't see any way out of it. And that it happened for them that day and miraculously is something that was completely unanticipated. We're going to remind people, you don't know. As of right now, you don't know. And so we're talking about, until you know, what do you do? And sometimes he intervenes miraculously. Sometimes he does not. But I love the stuff that we see in Hebrews, where it talks about that Jesus is greater than Moses. This is where we're going to go. So the Israelites found out that Moses was a trustworthy leader. And then Hebrews comes along and says, one greater than Moses is here. And that's from Hebrews 3, and I love that. And what we're going to try and talk to people about is going, look, it's not about trusting God for what he's going to do. It's about trusting in who he is.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if you carry that out, the miracle happened. Then they're in the desert, and it was like they forgot it even happened.
Yes, which is what happens in our...
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I giving too much away?
Yeah, no, but that's our next story.
But I think it illustrates, like, they were, even in the midst of a miracle, whether you're in the midst of a miracle or you're in the midst of something that isn't miraculous at all, your point of view as it relates to fear is what drives you. And even though they had something miraculous happen, it didn't. The condition of that miracle did not automatically change what was driving them.
Yep. Absolutely.
So that's good stuff. That's nice and practical.
Yep.
I like that. I like that a lot. All right, well, let's move on to the second week. And I've already kind of done that accidentally. But this week, one of the things we're going to quit, I quit complaining. I quit complaining. Oh, boy.
Yeah. I hate
that. Makes
like
me so angry when this topic comes up. Ugh, I can't even take it.
I hate it when that
Don't
happens.
get me started on this topic.
Well, too late. As Eric just alluded to, so God saves them in this miraculous way, and you think it's like, oh, great, everything's fine now, I'll never worry again. In fact, they go from not only getting fearful again, they actually become very, very what's the right, discontented and disappointed in what they think God's doing, and they begin complaining about, God, this is wrong and that's wrong, and there's this whole series of complaints where they end up complaining about everything from water to food to Moses' leadership to just the whole situation. And there's this pattern of complaining, and I like the biblical word in some of the texts. It uses the word grumbling, because it's not like saying, oh, I hate this. This is difficult. No, it's kind of grumbling against someone or grumbling against something, where there is some animosity and where there's maybe some bitterness. And I think we can feel that way about our circumstances. It's not like not liking something and saying, ooh, this this
right.
food doesn't.
Yeah, I would like to lodge a complaint, sir.
Yeah. It doesn't mean never send your food back at the restaurant.
Although don't, because they will spit on it. I mean, that's just pretty much, that's 101. So don't send your food back.
Okay.
But that's more practical advice.
That's more practical.
Than it is
we'll put that
having to do with a complaint.
We'll get the campus pastors
that'll be a good
share
post
that
moment. Yeah.
Yes.
Word of advice.
And it's really it's this pattern of grumbling, and we're gonna talk about the whole pattern throughout Exodus, but we're gonna start with one particular thing where they're grumbling about. They need water, and they come to some water, but the water doesn't taste good, and so they're grumbling against Moses and grumbling against God. What are we gonna drink? And so we're gonna start there and use that little kind of mini story, and then expand it to show all the other various things that they ended up complaining about, and how...
well, they get to a point where they we would rather die in Egypt than what this is.
Yeah.
That's grumbling.
Yeah, and I would say it probably wasn't exactly how they said it at an intonation level. How they said it was probably more like...
Less Seinfeldian?
Yeah, yeah.
More rage?
Yeah. It's like, and it murmuring. If you like a little onomatopoeia there, they're murmuring against the whole deal, and you know how it is. It's one of those things to where the situation is difficult, but when you sit and ruminate and just get mired down in it, it gets worse. And you can't always change your circumstances, but you can do something about the complaining and the murmuring and how it tends to make things worse. And so that's the thing we're going to be talking about.
Do you feel like this is more about just stop doing that?
Well, it's really interesting. We're going to tie in the water thing, since one of the things they complain a lot about is either not having water, or the water they have doesn't taste good. And we're going to parallel that with what Jesus says, where he compares the human heart to like a spring, and it's out of the overflow of the spring of your heart that your mouth speaks. So we're going to keep the water analogy alive. In fact, all the way through to the story of where John says to the woman at the well, "Whoever drinks this water again will be thirsty, but whoever drinks the water that I give," and he basically says, "I'm the water of life." And we're going to talk about moving more out of grumbling and into gratitude.
From grumbling to gratitude.
Yeah, and not like in some sort of syrupy, just be grateful for what you got. No, it's this whole thing of going, they had just been rescued after 400 years of slavery, and then the Red Sea parts, and they walk across on dry land, and all the Egyptians are completely wiped out. And so there's some very, very brief rejoicing, right, and then a return to grumbling. So there's this forgetting. So it's not just about being grateful or going, oh, it could be worse, but to going, no, what's God already done to get me to here?
I just had an image of Chris Farley's character when he interviews like Paul McCartney or whatever, but he's talking to the Israelites, and he says, Remember that one time when the Red Sea parted? That's awesome.
That was awesome. Yes, I do.
Yeah, I remember that. Apparently, none of the Israelites remembered that.
Yeah. How soon we forget. Sometimes the key pathway to gratitude is remembering what God's already done for you, and looking for what he is doing for you in the situation, despite what he seems to not be doing for you in the situation. And then we're going to be talking about this whole thing. Everything again is moving towards personal relationship with Jesus, where Jesus goes, hey, the water that you need, one way or another, I'm going to sustain you. Because in the first chapter of this series, the first installment, people are afraid of not getting what they really need and want. In the second chapter, the second installment, they're grumbling because what they have got, they feel is not sufficient. And so there's a kind of a progression here of how do you deal when you're not getting what you so badly feel you need and definitely feel you want.
Yeah, and ceasing the complaining and the grumbling and exchanging it with gratitude is the beginning of the process.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily create the solution to get you what you want.
No.
It's about who you are becoming in your relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, and it helps you in the circumstances before you find out what's going to happen, so it doesn't have to be worse than it is, because we're going to hit that over and over again, is going, I'm making things worse for myself. It's not just that things are happening and it doesn't feel good. It's that my reaction and my response, it's like the old Charles Swindoll quote. He says, the longer I live, the more I realize that life's 10% what happens to you and 90% your reaction to it. And we can try and dismiss that as, as trite or cliche, but it's like I think every single person knows there's like so much truth in that. But it's not just, let's all adjust and tweak our attitudes. It's like going, how can God help me experience that? How can God help me react better? And how can God help me respond better to my circumstances?
Nice. Love it. All right, well, let's move on to the third and final session in this Boom, Boom, Boom 3-week series. And this is after I've quit the whole fear thing, and then I quit complaining and grumbling. Now I'm going to quit comparing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Whatever you say.
Okay.
That might work for you.
Great story. As they're going through the desert, Miriam and Aaron, who are some of the co-leaders with Moses, they start grumbling against Moses and saying, ostensibly they're mad at him because he's married a woman who's not an Israelite. He marries a Cushite woman, and Cush is someplace that nobody knows exactly where it is anymore, but she was not an Israelite. So ostensibly Moses has misstepped here by marrying someone who's not one of us. But then you look a little deeper in the story, and what they're really seeing is they've compared themselves to him and said, hey, how's come everybody is looking to Moses as the mouthpiece of God, and Moses is the great leader? Because hasn't God spoken through us too? Because in the story, God has spoken and worked through both Miriam and Aaron. And so they're looking at what it seems like the blessing and the ministry that God's given Moses and going, hey, I'm getting ripped off here.
It isn't fair.
Yes,
That's
it's not.
for sure.
It's not fair.
Remember that we always talk about Aaron. Oh wait, no, we don't.
No,
we always talk about Moses.
Yeah,
we talk about Moses.
Yeah, and it's a cautionary tale because the grumbling and that flows out of this comparing and this envy and this jealousy. It seems like God deals with it pretty harshly. And for us it might seem strange because it says that Miriam was struck with leprosy, which of course begs the question, why just Miriam? And I've done some digging on this, and actually the text doesn't say that Aaron wasn't. It just says that Miriam was. The best textual critics on this, the smart guys who are commentators, say that odds are pretty strong that because Aaron became the leader and the kind of the one from whom the priestly class, he was the high priest, that basically it was a way of showing respect for the high priest to say that it happened to Miriam, but not to him. It didn't say it didn't happen to him; they just didn't mention it. And actually the Jewish tradition is that it happened to him too. And what's interesting, though, is I don't look at the leprosy as like, oh, I'm going to give you leprosy and it's going to be awful and horrible because you have now this incurable illness. She recovers from it, but because leprosy is unclean, she has to go outside the camp, and they end up being stalled in the wilderness for a week while she goes through the time of purification and cleansing. So the point isn't, look what God will do to you if you are a person who compares and lets it mess up your life. Now, that's not the point of the story. The point is, look what happens. Look what it does to the community, and and look at the ramifications of it. Not what God's going to do to you. So it's a really interesting thing. And
it's like the worst timeout you could ever get, right?
Big one. Yeah.
That's it. You have a timeout. You go over there with your leprosy
for a week.
What? I just wanted to go in the corner.
Yeah.
I just wanted to put my head in the corner for like 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Boy.
And it's interesting because there's a parable that Jesus tells about workers in the vineyard and guys that are hired early in the day, and they get paid a certain amount for a day's wages, and then the boss, because he's this really incredibly generous guy, gives the same wages to somebody who ended up getting hired, at like 4 o'clock when quitting time's 5, and the people are complaining, saying, "Oh, how come they got this and they got that?" And there's this thing that Jesus is saying, is going, you can always look at what it seems that God's doing for somebody else, and if that's the way that it works, it's going to make your situation, it's going to make you miserable. And I think if you look at our culture, man, we are constantly encouraged to compare ourselves to other people.
Well, that doesn't happen in Naperville.
No,
I don't know about some of your other, suburbs or boroughs within the Chicago
I've heard that
city
happens.
limits,
yeah.
but not in Naperville.
No. Because I would probably say that no one in Naperville, or probably anywhere nearby, looks at somebody else's house and says, "Oh, you make more money than him. How come he has a nicer house than us?" Or the whole thing. Honestly, I think it must be just so incredibly difficult to be female in our culture when all of these feminine physiques are being held up on the cover of every magazine, saying, you're supposed to look like this and compare yourself to this, and it happens to men too. But I just have never talked to a man who saw Matthew McConaughey's abs and really had a bad day because his didn't look like that. And then, I really...
Most of us are fairly convinced that they do look like that, whether or not they actually do.
Yeah. Yeah. But that whole thing, and there's, again, another 12-step saying is, compare and despair. Because comparing leads to despairing, and it's like, okay, what's God doing in my life? It's not about what God's doing in somebody else's life. And that's what was really Aaron and Miriam's problem. They wanted God to do in their life what God was doing in Moses' life. And it was just, it caused all sorts of dissension, and it ends up holding up the whole crew, the whole community for a whole week. And we're going to encourage people to go, okay, where are you making things worse for yourself by comparing yourself? Comparing yourself to your coworkers, comparing yourself to your brother or your sister. I mean, you have no idea. It's unbelievable. I had no idea till I started listening for it of how many people are involved in lawsuits surrounding wills because dad or mom left this to them, but only this to us. There's tons of people. There'll be people sitting in our services this weekend who haven't spoke to their brother or sister in years because the other person was given more than them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the other person was the favorite. And it's not that it doesn't hurt. It's that, it's this thing that's I can't control that, but it is within my sphere of control and the person God's made me to be, that I can focus more on what God's doing in my life instead of what God's doing in somebody else's life. And
possibly even choosing to celebrate what's happening in somebody else's life.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think, that's the thing we're trying to teach our kids, is when those things happen, it's like this person got that award, or they got that, or they're able to do this. Yeah. It's like, celebrate what's happening for them.
Yep.
It's okay that it sucks for you, but don't let it stop you from celebrating for the other person.
And the text that we also have from Hebrews, where we're turning the corner, obviously, in every service to Jesus, and what's Jesus got to do with this? It's interesting. It says, fix your eyes on Jesus. And the Hebrews, the people who received the book of Hebrews, from all we can tell, were being persecuted, and it's difficult for them, and it says, fix your eyes on Jesus. And I think that's like the opposite of fixing my eyes on my neighbor or my coworker or my brother or my sister or my friend or my whoever. And it's like going, okay, if I fix my eyes on him, then I'm looking at him and what he's doing in my life instead of somebody else and what he's doing in theirs.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to encourage people to do. And I just want to say this. If there's any part of this that feels like, oh, okay, it's just some pretty good advice, no. It's clear from research that people who are stuck in complaining, for instance, that it's harmful to their health, that the likelihood of them coming down with a serious illness or some kind of really debilitating disease just goes exponentially up, depending on how much complaining is going on in their life. And the same thing is true with comparing. These things aren't just bad ideas. They really can make life unbearable and make life miserable. And the thing that's tricky about them is we think that it's our circumstances that are our problems. Mm-hmm. When really what's going on is, okay, my problems have something a lot to do with what's happening to me or not happening to me, but I have more influence here than I had any idea, and I'm really making myself miserable. That's one of my favorite old sayings: is pain is inevitable, but misery is optional. And we're going to try and help people go, okay, so this whole Jesus thing can actually help me. It doesn't promise me protection from pain, but it shows me a way out of misery.
And I think that, in some ways, self-help industry is sort of co-opted, some of the stuff. So when we see this stuff, we don't even see it as biblical. We see it as, like, practical and nice. Yeah. Like, that's a good idea to not do that. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, in the land of Oprah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
I think there are people in our environments who are trying to pursue Jesus, but they're so mired in these behaviors, and if they just saw in a way that was not just helpful, but even like kind of blows your mind a little bit, that Jesus had an investment in these kind of problems and these kind of concerns and these kind of behaviors, that he actually did speak to them. I think it would open their eyes a lot more in terms of being able to trust what it means to have a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
It is easy. Even just me right now, 3 weeks in, I'm like, okay, good, yeah, let's be helpful. Yeah. It is kind of easy to sort of brush that off and maybe not give it the gravity that it deserves, or the potential for life change that can happen within making these adjustments, because they're not minor adjustments.
No.
For many people who are completely locked into these behaviors, to actually stop doing them and to replace it with a different kind of behavior is massive. Yeah. And won't be, 1 hour on a Sunday. Yeah. It's going to take more than that, that's for sure.
And the thing I like to keep in mind, just kind of as a preacher guy, is that the people that our heart beats hardest for to reach come in. They all come in every week with 2 questions. Does God really love me? And can he really help me? And some people have never, ever been helped by anything they've heard in church ever before. So don't underestimate the opportunity to go, oh, there's somebody out there, and they've never saw that not only does God really love them, but that God can really help them. And that's what we're trying to do in this series.
It's good stuff. I want to go to this series. I will not quit.
I predict you will. I predict you will go to at least 3 of them.
At least 3. Because who needs a vacation?
No.
It's a solid series, and whether you are brainstorming stuff for a large group experience or you're taking this information and applying it to a small group discussion guide, we do want to encourage you to brainstorm in high quantities, because we know that the more ideas there are, the better those ideas become, and the easier it will be able to see the great ideas.
Plus, we know the quality's going to be there.
Quality's going to be there. We know who we're talking to.
That's right.
So there's no doubt about that. And looking forward to all the great stuff that's going to come from this Big Idea series. So wrapping up, I'm Eric Bramlett, and he is Tim Sutherland. I thought maybe you would say it.
Oh.
That's it. I quit.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you later.